The transfer order came through on a prayer strip, stamped with the Aquila and countersigned by 3 departments that never agreed on anything. My designation in the munitorum rolls Serf Tertius 889 Delta vanished between one shift bell and the next. The overseer who'd beaten compliance into my spine for 6 years didn't even look up from his slate when they came for me. 2 armored serfs in kennel leathers that stank of rendered fat and stimulant compounds stood at the hab block threshold. Their eyes had the particular deadness that comes from watching too many things die badly. "You're meat for the kennels now," the taller one said. His voice carried the rasp of someone who'd screamed orders over howling for so long his throat had given up protesting. "Pack what fits in your hands, leave the rest for recycling. I own nothing worth carrying. A spare shift robe, work gloves with the fingertips worn through, a devotional chain I'd pulled from a corpse during a manufactorum accident. The chain went around my neck. Everything else stayed. The munitorum would assign my bunk to another body before the next cycle. That was the first sign I'd crossed into something that operated on different mathematics in the kennels. You don't get replaced. You get rendered down and fed back into the system. They walked me through sectors I'd never seen, past the armory levels where tech marines rebuilt the chapter's killing tools with prayers that sounded like metal scraping bone, through the Medicae ward's outer ring where failed aspirants moaned behind plastic screens, their bodies rejecting gene seed in ways that made the apothecaries take notes, down service shafts that hadn't seen proper maintenance since before the last compliance action. The temperature dropped. The air thickened with a smell that bypassed my nose and went straight to the primitive parts of my brain, the parts that knew to run from things with teeth before humans had words for fear. The entrance to the kennels proper was a blast door thick enough to stop a direct hit from siege weaponry. Scratch marks covered the inside surface. Some old, some fresh enough that the metal still held moisture from whatever had tried to claw through. The shorter serf pressed his palm to a reader that scanned down to the bone. The machine spirit gurgled approval. Locks disengaged with sounds like breaking vertebrae. "First rule," the tall one said as we crossed the threshold. "Everything here bites. The beasts bite. The handlers bite. The machines bite. The walls would bite, if we gave them teeth. You survive by biting back faster and harder than whatever's coming for your throat." The kennel sprawled across 3 levels connected by cargo lifts and spiral stairs, worn smooth by centuries of boots and paws. Cages lined the walls, not the clean adamantine cells of a proper prison, but welded together scrap reinforced with whatever the tech marines deemed unfit for proper service. Industrial lumens flickered overhead, half of them dead, the rest throwing shadows that moved wrong. The noise hit like a physical thing, howling, snarling, the wet sound of meat being torn, the electronic whine of shock, collars cycling, chains rattling against reinforced posts, and, underneath it all, a rhythmic thumping that might have been a heart or might have been something worse. The chief handler waited in what they called the surgery, a converted cargo bay, where medical equipment had been bolted to the walls with no regard for sterility or sense. He stood 7 feet of scar tissue and muscle gone ropey with age, his left arm replaced from the elbow down with an augmetic that ended in a 3-pronged grip designed for holding thrashing skulls. Tattoos covered what skin remained visible, each one marking a deployment where his beasts had earned their meat. His name was Crest, though I wouldn't learn that for weeks. In the kennels, names were things you earned by not dying. "Show me your hands," he said. I held them out. He grabbed my wrists with his flesh hand, turned them over, examined the calluses from munitorum work. His augmetic arm whirred as he reached for something on the surgical table, a collar, thick leather reinforced with metal strips, the inside lined with monitoring nodes. "This reads your vitals," he said, locking it around my throat. The metal was cold and the leather still held moisture from whoever wore it last. Pulse, stress hormones, fear markers, aggression spikes. The beasts smell all of that anyway, but we like data. You panic, we know. You think about running, we know. You develop what we call sympathies for the livestock, we definitely know. He pulled a data slate from a wall mount, its screen cracked but functional. My new designation appeared in blocky text. Kennel-thrall 1001. Below that, assignment details that made my stomach tighten. Pack 13. Gravel's teeth. Active deployment status. Aggression index. 8.3 out of 10. Previous handler mortality rate that the slate marked as within acceptable parameters, which meant it was high enough they'd stopped counting individual deaths. Your pack is in Bay 7, Crest said. 10 beasts, gene-bred for tunnel fighting. The alpha is Gravel. She's killed 3 thralls, but only ones that showed weakness. The rest are her get born from her, trained by her, loyal to her until their neurons stop firing. You feed them, clean their quarters, maintain their equipment, monitor their health, and when we deploy, you keep them operational. Operational means killing what we point them at without eating our own forces, usually. He handed me a shock baton, its grip worn smooth, its charge pack humming with barely contained violence. Then came the rest of my kit. A leather apron thick enough to turn claws but not teeth, heavy gloves that ran to my elbows, a mono knife for cutting feed and other necessities, a handful of stim injectors, and a small vox bead that would let me scream for help that probably wouldn't come. Bay 7, he said again. Try not to bleed on your first day. It gives them ideas. The walk to Bay 7 took me past 20 other packs. Each kennel-thrall I passed bore scars like badges of service, missing fingers, bite marks that had healed wrong, augmetic replacements for parts the beasts had claimed. They watched me with the same evaluating stare the overseer had used on new munitorum drones, measuring how many shifts I'd last before something important broke. Bay 7's door bore Gravel's designation burned into the metal, along with a list of combat honors that meant nothing to me then. Thrakos Breach, Siege of Penthos, Culling of Hive Mordant. The lock responded to my caller's signal. The door ground open on servos that needed maintenance. The smell hit first. Not rot would have been simple. This was the concentrated essence of Predator, 1,000 years of killing instinct, distilled into an atmospheric pressure that made breathing feel like drowning. The pack waited in a rough semicircle, having heard the door's particular grinding note, and assembled to evaluate their new keeper. Gravel stood at the center. The Picts in my briefing hadn't captured what generations of selective breeding and surgical enhancement could produce. She stood shoulder-high to a baseline human, her body a framework of overlapping muscle groups that didn't exist in natural canines. Her hide was a mottled gray that seemed to shift in the flickering lumens, scar tissue forming patterns that might have been intentional or might have been the universe's idea of a joke. Adamantine caps covered her primary fangs. Her eyes, Emperor preserve me, her eyes held an intelligence that had been refined down to a single point, evaluation of threat and prey, with nothing wasted on concepts like mercy or doubt. The others arranged themselves by size and scarring hierarchy written in flesh. The smallest, a runt with one eye gone milky from a past infection, pressed itself against the back wall. The largest male, designated render in my files, stood just behind Gravel's left shoulder, his muzzle scarred from what looked like close contact with a flamer. I entered the bay because hesitation was death here, the same as anywhere. The door sealed behind me with finality. Gravel's head tilted 15 degrees enough to show interest without commitment to action. I had maybe 3 seconds to establish position before they decided it for me. The shock baton stayed on my belt. Showing threat to a pack that had been bred to ignore pain would only mark me as something to test. Instead, I pulled the feeding roster from my apron pocket, moving slow and deliberate, letting them see my hands, letting them smell that I wasn't afraid, even though terror crawled up my spine like cold oil. Feeding schedule stands as written, I said, my voice steady because it had to be. Medical inspections at 0600. Combat drills after second feeding. Anyone who breaks protocol gets the bolt. The bolt was the captive bolt gun mounted on the wall, a simple pneumatic spike designed to punch through skulls when chemistry and conditioning failed. Every bay had one. The successful thralls never had to use it. The unsuccessful thralls became teaching moments and protein supplements. Gravel approached. Each step was deliberate, her weight distributed perfectly despite her size, paws making no sound on the metal decking. She stopped just outside arm's reach, close enough that I could smell the synthetic hormones seeping from her modified glands, far enough that I'd have time to react if she lunged. Her evaluation took 13 seconds. I counted them in heartbeats that the caller faithfully recorded. She turned away. The dismissal was permission to exist in her space. The pack dispersed to their corners, the choreography of dominance and submission playing out in movements too subtle for anyone who hadn't been briefed on pack dynamics. Render marked his territory against a support post. Two females began grooming each other with tongues modified to rasp flesh from bone. The runt stayed pressed to its corner, trembling in frequencies that suggested neurological damage from a past deployment. My first task was inventory. Each beast required documentation that would have made a administratum clerk weep. I cataloged their scars, logged their weight by sight, approaching with a scale on day one would have been suicide, noted behavioral markers, checked their augmetics for signs of rejection, recorded the wear on their dental implants. Gravel tolerated my presence as I worked, occasionally lifting her head to track my movement, but otherwise maintaining the studied indifference of an apex predator who hadn't decided if I was worth killing. The feeding routine came next. The meat arrived on a cargo sled vat-grown protein, mixed with combat stimulants, growth hormones, and enough vitamins to keep their enhanced metabolisms from consuming themselves. Each portion had to be weighed, temperature-checked, and laced with the specific chemical cocktails that kept their aggression within deployable parameters. Too much and they'd turn on their handlers. Too little and they'd lose the edge that made them worth the resources. I laid out 10 bowls in the prescribed formation alpha first, then by rank, the runt last. The pack waited until I stepped back and gave the release whistle. 2 short bursts followed by a long note. They moved like a wave of muscle and teeth, each beast going to their designated bowl without challenge, except the runt. It waited, shaking, until the others had finished before creeping forward to lick the remnants. "That one's failed 3 deployments," a voice said from the doorway. Handler Brusque stood there, his own pack 8, the grinders visible behind him in the corridor. He was everything the recruitment posters promised a chapter serf could become: scarred, competent, and still breathing after 5 years in the kennels. "Neurological scarring from a phosphex burn," I said, not turning from my observation post. "Motor controls compromised, but scent tracking seems intact. Crest wants it culled before the next deployment. Says it's a liability. When's deployment? 3 weeks. Maybe 4, if the fleet runs late. 3 weeks to either fix a broken beast or put a bolt through its skull." I looked at the runt, still licking bowls that had been empty for minutes, its damaged brain stuck in loops its body couldn't break. "I'll log it for assessment," I said. Brusque laughed a sound like grinding gears. "First day, and already thinking you can fix them. That's adorable. Give it a week. You'll be begging to pull the bolt yourself." He left me with the pack and the smell and the certainty that I'd traded one form of servitude for another that had teeth. The rest of that first shift blurred checking water supplies, documenting stool samples, running diagnostic on their collars, cleaning the bay's filtration systems of hair, and worse, noting every behavioral tick that might indicate drift from baseline. Gravel watched it all from her position atop a raised platform that served as her throne. Her pack responded to my movements with gradually decreasing interest as my scent became part of their environment's background radiation. By shift's end, I'd been accepted as furniture useful, necessary, and only worth attacking if I stopped functioning properly. The sleep quarters for kennel-thralls were converted maintenance closets barely large enough for a cot and a footlocker. The walls were thin enough that I could hear other thralls moving, some crying, some praying, some making sounds that suggested the stress had finally cracked something important. My collar recorded it all, sending data streams to cogitators that would analyze whether I was developing the proper psychological calluses or heading for a breakdown that would require my replacement. I lay on the cot that smelled of fear sweat and old blood, staring at pipes that leaked condensation in rhythms that almost made sense. Tomorrow would bring combat drills teaching creatures bred for killing how to kill more efficiently. The day after, surgical modifications to increase their lethality. The day after that, chemical trials to push their aggression indexes toward that perfect balance between useful and uncontrollable. But first, I had to survive tonight, and the collar around my throat was already learning the rhythm of my nightmares. The next morning came with klaxons that served as our wake cycle. No gradual emergence from sleep in the kennels. You went from unconscious to operational in seconds, or you missed feeding windows, and the beasts started eating each other. I rolled from the cot, still wearing yesterday's leathers because changing meant time and time meant opportunity for something to go wrong. The senior thralls had already assembled in the commons, a reinforced chamber where we took our own meals and received briefings. Crest stood at the front, data slate in his flesh hand, his augmetic clicking through warming routines. Behind him, a hololithic display showed deployment vectors I didn't yet understand. "Listen close, meat," he began, his voice carrying over the sound of 30 thralls trying to wake up. "In 2 weeks, maybe less, we deploy to Karos Syndicate. Underhive pacification. The Wardens want tunnel supremacy, which means the packs go in first. Each team needs their beasts at peak performance. That means drills. That means conditioning. That means some of your beasts are going to die in training, so the rest can perform in the field." He gestured to the display. Red zones marked where the packs would operate maintenance tunnels too narrow for Astartes, ventilation shafts that connected hive levels, the between spaces where only vermin and worse things lived. Pack 13 gets the northern insertion. Gravel knows tunnel work. Her last 7 deployments were all close quarters. Keep her sharp. The runt gets 1 week to show improvement, or it gets the bolt. Questions? Nobody questioned Crest. Questions suggested you didn't understand your role, and not understanding your role suggested you were a liability. Liabilities in the kennels didn't last long enough to become statistics. Drills commence after first feeding. Full armor protocols. Anyone whose beast breaks conditioning gets to explain it to the chaplain. The chaplain. I'd seen him once during my transfer, a mountain of ceramite and righteousness who treated the beasts like weapons that happened to breathe. His role in the kennels was simple: ensure the packs remained spiritually compliant, which translated to making sure their killing stayed pointed in the right direction. When a beast started showing signs of that particular madness we called drift, the chaplain made the final determination recoverable or requiring purification. First feeding went smooth. Gravel had accepted my presence enough that she no longer tracked my every movement. The pack fell into their routine alpha first, hierarchy enforced, the runt waiting until safety was assured. I laced their food with combat stims calibrated to bring them just to the edge of frenzy. Too much, and they'd turn the training bay into an abattoir. Too little, and they wouldn't perform to standard. The training bay was a converted cargo hold rebuilt to simulate every kind of killing ground the Wardens might encounter. Adjustable walls created corridors that could narrow or widen on command. The floor could be flooded with water, oil, or other substances to change footing. Hidden dispensers could release smoke, gas, or pheromone triggers. Murder servitors waited in wall alcoves, their combat protocols simplified to emerge, fight, die, get replaced. I led Pack 13 through the connecting corridor, their leashes chains thick enough to anchor a rhino wrapped around my augmented belt. Gravel took point as always, her gait shifting from casual to predatory the moment she smelled the training bay's particular cocktail of violence and opportunity. The rest followed in their established order, muscles coiling with anticipation. Handler Yorv was already there with Pack 6, his beasts running a sweep and clear drill through a simulated hab block. We watched them flow through doorways like liquid death, taking down servitors with precision that would have made a tactical squad proud. Yorv's alpha, a monster called Carve, took a servitor's head off with a single bite and shake. The skull rolled past my feet, its augmetic eyes still blinking. "Your turn, new blood," Yorv said, pulling his pack back with whistle commands I was still learning. Let's see if 13 remembers their trade. I configured the bay for tunnel work, narrow corridors, low ceilings, minimal light. The murder servitors armed with stub guns and crude blades, programmed to simulate hive gangers. I checked each beast's combat collar, ensuring the recording nodes would capture every bite, every kill, every moment of hesitation that might indicate drift. The release whistle felt too loud in the enclosed space. Gravel moved before the sound finished, her pack flowing behind her like a gray tide. They hit the first intersection in perfect formation, 2 left, 2 right, Gravel and 3 others straight through. The servitors emerged from their hides, weapons raised. What happened next was why the Wardens kept beasts, despite the resources, despite the danger, despite the moral flexibility required. The pack didn't fight, they flowed. Gravel took a servitor's gun arm at the elbow, while Render hamstrung it from behind. 2 females worked in perfect synchronization to bring down a target twice their size. The pack moved through the simulated tunnel like they were born to it, which in a very real sense, they were. Except for the runt. It froze at the first intersection, its damaged nerves firing contradictory signals. A servitor emerged from a hide directly above it. The stub gun cracked. The runt yelped a sound that had no place in a chapter's war beast and ran. Not forward into combat, not backward to safety, but in circles, chasing its own tail while its packmates finished the engagement. I hit the recall whistle before Gravel could notice and turn on the weakling. The pack responded instantly, returning to formation with blood on their muzzles and satisfaction in their posture. All except the runt, which continued its neurological loop until I physically grabbed it and held it still. That's a bolt-worthy performance, Yorv observed. Crest won't tolerate that in deployment. He was right. A beast that couldn't fight was just meat waiting to be processed. But as I held the runt, feeling its muscles spasm in patterns that spoke of damaged neural pathways rather than cowardice, I wondered if there might be another way. 1 week, I said. That's what Crest gave me. Waste of time. Put it down now. Save yourself the trouble. But I'd spent 6 years in the munitorum learning that everything broken could be repurposed if you understood the break. The runt's problem wasn't fear, it was misfiring synapses, probably from the phosphex burn Brusk had mentioned. Fear could be beaten out. Neural damage needed different solutions. That night, after second feeding and bay cleaning and the endless documentation the kennels required, I requisitioned medical supplies from the apothecarium. The junior medicae didn't question why a kennel-thrall needed neural inhibitors and synthetic neurotransmitters. In the fortress-monastery, strange requests were standard. I spent 3 hours studying the runt's medical history. The phosphex exposure had burned channels through its nervous system, creating feedback loops that trapped signals. Its brain sent the command to fight, but the message got lost, circling through damaged tissue until the body just ran in sympathetic circles. The apothecaries had marked it as unsalvageable, but they thought in terms of perfect function. In the kennels, we thought in terms of sufficient function. The treatment was crude inject inhibitors to block the damaged pathways, flood the system with synthetic transmitters to force new routes, and hope the beast's enhanced healing would build fresh neural connections before its brain burned out. I had 7 days, and no guarantee it would work. I started that night, waiting until the pack was asleep before entering the bay. Gravel opened one eye as I passed, evaluated my intent, and returned to sleep. The runt huddled in its corner, trembling through dreams of phosphex and failure. The first injection went in clean. It whimpered but didn't wake. I logged the dose, set my chronometer for 4 hours, and went to document the next injection site. This was the reality of the kennels, not just feeding and cleaning, but actively engineering creatures to meet exact specifications of lethality. Every beast was an investment of resources the chapter couldn't afford to waste. Every thrall was expected to maximize that investment or be replaced by someone who could. 4 hours. Another injection. The runt's trembling decreased by measurable degrees. Its breathing steadied. When morning came and first feeding commenced, it approached its bowl without circling. Small progress, but progress nonetheless. The second day brought live-fire drills. The wardens wanted to test the packs against actual resistance, so they brought in condemned prisoners hive scum marked for execution anyway, now given the chance to die serving the chapter's training needs. They were armed with whatever weapons they'd been captured with, promised freedom if they could survive the full drill. None ever did, but hope made them fight harder, which made for better training. I held 13 at the ready position, while Crest explained the parameters. 5 prisoners, 3 minutes. No survivor could leave the training bay. The packs would be scored on speed, efficiency, and minimal damage to themselves. Gravel's ears tracked every word, her intelligence parsing tactical data despite being shaped like a beast. The prisoners saw us and tried to cluster together a natural but useless response. Pack hunting evolved specifically to break group cohesion. I ran through my mental checklist. Stim levels optimal, dental sleeves secure, combat recording active. The runt stood steadier, its third round of neural treatment showing results. Release whistle. Gravel led the charge, using Render as a distraction while she flanked. The females went high, using the bay's walls to gain elevation. The prisoners' screams echoed off metal walls. I watched the runt, counting seconds. It moved forward, not fast, not coordinated, but forward. When a prisoner broke from the group, running for a door that wouldn't open, the runt followed. Its attack was clumsy, more fall than pounce, but its teeth found the target's hamstring. The prisoner went down. Render finished what the runt started. 2 minutes, 43 seconds. All targets eliminated. Minor injuries, only one female took a knife across her shoulder that would need suturing. The runt had participated. Barely, but participation was progress. Better, Crest noted on his data slate. But better isn't good enough. 4 more days. 4 days to turn a neurologically compromised beast into something that could survive deployment. I increased the treatment intensity, adding electrical stimulation to force neural pathways to rebuild faster. The runt stopped trembling entirely. Its gait smoothed. When I ran basic response drills, it completed them at 70% efficiency. Not great, but the wardens had deployed with worse. The third night, Gravel did something unexpected. She approached the runt during feeding and dropped a portion of her meat in front of it. In pack dynamics, this was acceptance, the alpha acknowledging a member's right to exist within the group. The runt took the offered meat with careful teeth, its tail attempting a wag that its damaged nerves turned into a twitch. "Interesting," said a voice from the doorway. The chaplain stood there, his armor black as void, his skull helm reflecting the bay's harsh lumens. He entered without permission. Chaplains needed no permission and stood over the runt. His ceramite fingers could have crushed its skull without effort. "This one was marked for termination," he said. "It's showing improvement, Lord Chaplain. Neural inhibitors are restructuring the damaged pathways." "Improvement." He said the word like it tasted wrong. "Brother, Sergeant Castor reports the deployment timeline has accelerated. We launch in 3 days. Will this beast be ready? Truth or lie, both carried consequences. It will function at minimum acceptable parameters, Lord Chaplain." He stood silent for 17 seconds. I counted them in heartbeats the collar recorded. Finally, he reached down and placed one ceramite finger on the runt's skull. It froze, every instinct screaming danger, but it didn't run. Couldn't run, with an angel of death touching it. If this beast fails in deployment and causes casualties among the Emperor's faithful, its blood is on your hands, thrall. As will be your own. He left without another word. The runt collapsed the moment his presence faded, its overtaxed nervous system finally giving in to exhaustion. I carried it to its corner, noting how light it felt despite the muscle mass neural damage had been consuming its body from within, calories burning to feed misfiring synapses. 3 days. 3 days to finish what I'd started, or face consequences that weren't specified because they didn't need to be. The deployment order came down through command channels that bypassed the usual bureaucracy. Karos Syndicate had fallen to insurgency 6 months prior, the kind of slow rot that started in the underhive and spread upward like gangrene through a limb. The wardens would cut out the infection with typical efficiency, but first they needed their beasts to clear the veins. We loaded into the strike cruiser times Vindication's edge times at 0300, the pack sedated just enough to prevent them from tearing through the ship's cargo hold during transit. I rode with Gravel's unconscious form, monitoring her vitals through every translation and void shift. Her neural activity spiked during warp transit. Whatever dreams gene-bred killers had, the Empyrean made them worse. The runt, surprisingly, remained stable throughout. Its rebuilt neural pathways handled the stress better than its packmates' natural ones. 3 days in the warp. 3 days of checking restraints, adjusting sedation levels, cleaning waste from beasts whose metabolisms never truly stopped, even in forced sleep. Other handlers worked their own charges Yorv with Pack 6, Brusque trying to keep Pack 8 from developing pressure sores, new thralls, learning that void travel meant constant vigilance against a dozen ways their beasts could die before even reaching deployment. The apothecaries visited twice daily, taking blood samples that vanished into their laboratories. They were tracking something in the genetic markers, drift patterns at the molecular level that predicted when a bloodline would turn. Gravel's samples consistently came back flagged with cautionary yellows that hadn't yet turned to termination reds. Translation to real space brought every beast awake at once, their modified nervous systems detecting the shift before the ship's klaxons announced it. Gravel rose from sedation, like something excavated from deep earth, her muscles firing in sequence as combat drugs flushed from her system. She fixed me with a stare that evaluated whether I was food, threat, or furniture. After 4 seconds, she classified me as the latter and turned her attention to her pack. Karos Syndicate filled the viewport, a hive world that had forgotten what sunlight looked like beneath centuries of industrial smoke. The briefing hall stank of gun oil and anticipation as the Warden's command structure laid out our insertion vectors. Captain Darius stood at the strategic display, his scarred ceramite reflecting hololithic murder maps. The insurgents have fortified the transit networks between lower hive sectors 7 through 12. They're using the maintenance passages our armor can't navigate. That's where the packs earn their meat. Red zones bloomed across the display ventilation networks, service tunnels, the forgotten spaces between proper architecture where only vermin and worse things lived. Each pack received designated sectors. 13 drew the northern insertion through what had once been a water treatment facility, now a maze of corroded pipes and ambush points. Handler contingent deploys with second company. You maintain pack coherence until we reach the insertion points, then you release on my command. Extraction at designated rally points, if your beasts survive. No retrieval for handlers who lose their packs. That last part wasn't cruelty, it was mathematics. A handler without beasts was dead weight in a combat zone. Better to die with them than slow the advance. We made planetfall in drop pods modified for livestock transport. The acceleration crushed me against gravel's sedated bulk, while the runt whimpered through its rebuilt neurons firing wrong. 13 seconds of freefall, then impact hard enough to crack teeth if you didn't know to keep your jaw loose. The doors blew. Karos Syndicate's air flooded in promethium exhaust, human decay, and the particular sweetness of industrial chemicals eating through organic matter. The staging area was a captured administratum block, its windows blown out, its walls marked with impact craters that told stories of resistance already crushed. Second Company had established a perimeter with kill zones overlapping in patterns that would turn any assault into processed meat. We assembled in the courtyard while Tech Marines ran final weapons checks and chaplains performed the rites of fury that would carry the Wardens through what came next. Gravel shook off the last sedation, her enhanced metabolism burning through chemicals that would have killed baseline humans. The pack formed up around her, their hierarchy asserting itself through posture and positioning. The runt took its place at the periphery, its movements still showing occasional stutters but functional enough to maintain position. Handler Crest ran us through final checks, while artillery thundered in the distance, the Imperial Guard softening positions we'd soon assault. Each beast's combat recorder activated. Shock collars synchronized. Scent keys distributed in sealed vials that would break on impact, marking targets for pursuit. My own kit was heavier than training spare collars, additional shock caps, trauma supplies for both human and beast, 3 days of combat rations I probably wouldn't live to eat. Northern insertion in 30, Crest announced. Throne protect any handler who loses control of their pack. We moved through streets that had been residential before war turned them into kill zones. Building facades had collapsed, creating rubble slopes that beasts could navigate but armor couldn't. Bodies in various states of decomposition marked where previous attempts at pacification had failed. The packs grew agitated, their bred instincts responding to death scent, with increased salivation and muscle tension. The water treatment facility rose from the industrial sprawl like a canker, massive pipes feeding into a structure that architectural plans claimed had 5 levels but probably went deeper. The insurgents had been here for months. Enough time to turn every corridor into a death trap, every room into a potential tomb. Second Company's tactical squad established our insertion perimeter, while Devastators set up covering fire positions. Brother Sergeant Castor surveyed the breach point, a maintenance access that had been cut wider by melta charges, but still too narrow for power armor. Packs go first, he commanded. Clear the initial chambers. We follow once you've established a foothold. I looked at the hole that would swallow us, darkness that seemed to breathe with hostile intent. Released Gravel's chain. Pulled the first scent key from my belt. The vial shattered against her skull, coating her in synthesized enemy pheromones that would mark anything similar as prey. The release whistle came out steady despite my throat trying to close. Gravel launched through the breach like a gray missile, the pack flowing behind her in trained sequence. I followed with the other handlers, leaving the relative safety of Astartes' firepower for tunnels that had never known the Emperor's light. The first chamber had been an overflow tank, now drained and converted to a checkpoint. 3 insurgents died before they could process that they were under attack. Gravel took the first at the throat, her enhanced jaws crushing through a flak vest like it was paper. Render hamstrung the second, while 2 females brought down the third in perfect synchronization. But the runt hesitated at a corpse, its damaged neurons trying to process whether the threat was eliminated. An insurgent appeared from a concealed position, one the pack had missed in their initial sweep. The autogun came up. I moved before thinking, the shock baton extending as I closed distance. The electrified end caught him in the temple. He dropped, convulsing. The runt fell on him with desperate gratitude, making up for hesitation with enthusiasm that painted the walls. "Contact front," Brusque's voice from the parallel tunnel. The sound of Pack 8 engaging. Screams that ended wet. We pushed deeper. The facility's original purpose was lost under generations of modification and decay. Pipes ran through walls at angles that hurt to contemplate. Water, or something that might once have been water, dripped from ceiling joints, carrying chemicals that made exposed skin itch. The lumens had died decades ago, leaving us to navigate by the tactical lights mounted on our collars and the beast's superior low-light vision. Gravel led us through a sequence of chambers that tactical data said shouldn't exist, spaces carved out between the official architecture where the Forgotten had built their own kingdom. Shrines to dark powers decorated with human bones. Sleeping quarters that were more nest than room. A surgery where someone had been attempting to graft additional arms onto volunteers or victims. The distinction hardly mattered now. The pack cleared them all with mechanical efficiency. Stack at doorways. Evaluate threats. Eliminate. Move. The runt kept pace, its neural reconstruction holding under combat stress. I logged each engagement, each kill, each moment, where doctrine held against the chaos of battle. Then we hit the first real resistance. The insurgents had converted a pump station into a strong-point heavy weapons behind reinforced barriers, overlapping fields of fire, and they knew we were coming. The first burst caught 2 of Yorv's beasts in the open, turning them into meat before they could react. The rest of us pulled back, handlers cursing while our beasts snarled frustration at being denied. Kills they could smell but not reach. "We go around," Crest decided, "through the maintenance shafts." The shafts were narrower than the training simulations, barely wide enough for the beasts, impossible for a human in armor. We stripped to base layer clothing, keeping only essential kit. The shock batons had to be left behind. If we lost control in those tunnels, we'd have no way to restore it. Gravel went first, her gray bulk somehow compressing to fit through spaces that seemed physically impossible. The pack followed, their bodies flowing like water, finding the path of least resistance. We crawled after them through metal tubes that amplified every sound, our breathing, their panting, the distant thunder of battle overhead where the wardens pushed through more conventional routes. The shaft opened into the pump station's lower level, behind the insurgent position. They never saw us coming. The packs fell on them from below and behind, turning their strong point into an abattoir in seconds. I watched Gravel tear through a man's spine with the same casual efficiency she'd shown eating her morning ration. The runt surprised me by taking down a fleeing insurgent with a leap that would have been impossible before its neural rebuild. Its new pathways had given it capabilities its original configuration lacked. We held the pump station until Second Company arrived. Brother Sergeant Castor stepping through bodies without acknowledgement. His helmet turned toward me, evaluated the intact status of my pack, and moved on. That was as close to approval as handlers received. Deeper into the facility, the insurgents had fallen back to prepared positions, leaving booby traps that claimed another beast from Pack 6, a mono-wire at neck height that Yorv's Alpha found the hard way. We started sending the runts first, their lesser value making them expendable scouts. Mine survived 3 traps through luck or newfound competence, earning position closer to the pack's center. The chemical smell grew stronger, not just industrial runoff, but something deliberately manufactured. The apothecary attached to Second Company took readings that made him invoke the Emperor's protection. The insurgents were brewing something in the facility's depths, something that made hardened warriors reach for rebreathers. We found the source in what had been the primary treatment chamber, a vast space where water had once been purified for millions, now converted to a laboratory of heretical science. Vats of organic matter bubbled with forced growth. Things that might have started as human floated in suspension tanks, their proportions wrong, their movements suggesting consciousness trapped in forms that shouldn't exist. The insurgent leader waited at the chamber's heart, surrounded by followers who'd undergone partial transformation, extra limbs grafted with surprising skill, organs visible through translucent skin that pulsed with artificial life. They didn't run. They welcomed us with sounds that human throats shouldn't make. "Release all packs," Castor commanded. I broke the remaining scent keys against Gravel's hide, flooding her with target markers that would send her into maximum aggression. Every handler did the same. What followed was not battle but extermination. The packs hit the cultists like a wave against a crumbling seawall. Gravel took the leader's throat out before he could finish whatever incantation he'd started. The runt proved itself by hamstringing a thing with 4 arms that was reaching for a detonator. Render and the females worked in perfect coordination to bring down targets that had grown too large for single beasts to handle. But the cultists' modifications weren't just cosmetic. They fought with strength beyond human limits, with redundant organs that kept them moving after mortal wounds. One grabbed a beast from Pack 8 and tore it in half with hands that had been replaced with industrial claws. Another took 7 kills to finally stop moving, its nervous system rewired to ignore everything but the command to fight. When it ended, the chamber looked like a slaughterhouse's fever dream. The wardens moved through with flamers, burning everything that might contaminate or corrupt. The packs were recalled, their muzzles painted red, their eyes holding that particular satisfaction that came from fulfilling their purpose. But something had changed in Gravel. She responded to my recall whistle, but her movement was wrong, too fluid, too eager. When I checked her eyes, the pupils were dilated despite the chamber's harsh lumens. Her breathing came in patterns that matched no baseline I'd logged. "She's tasting it," the apothecary said, scanning her with an auspex that clicked like an angry insect. "The chemicals in the air, the modified blood, she's processing it differently than designed. Her metabolism is adapting. Is she drifting? Not yet. But mark her for close observation. If she starts showing preference for modified targets over baseline humans, we have a problem." We extracted through the same tunnels, now slick with blood that made footing treacherous. The runt slipped once, its paws unable to find purchase, and slid into Gravel. She turned with jaws wide, ready to discipline what she perceived as challenge. But she stopped, her modified brain processing something in the runt's scent, perhaps recognizing its neural reconstruction as another form of modification, something familiar in a packmate that had been remade, like she was being remade from within. She let it live. That small mercy worried me more than violence would have. The next 3 days blurred into systematic extermination. We cleared 17 sectors, each one revealing new depths of heretical modification. The insurgents had been experimenting for months, maybe years, turning their followers into weapons that barely qualified as human. The packs adapted to each new horror with disturbing efficiency, their killing becoming more creative, more thorough. Gravel started collecting trophies, fingers with extra joints, organs that shouldn't exist, scales of skin that had hardened into natural armor. She'd carry them back to our staging area and arrange them in patterns that meant something to her modified consciousness. I logged it all, adding to a file that grew thicker with concerning observations. Deployment Day 5 brought us to the manufactory district, where intelligence suggested the insurgents were mass-producing their modifications. The approach was through sewer tunnels that hadn't seen maintenance since before the hive was founded. Waist-deep in filth that corroded our boots, following packs who seemed to relish the environment's hostility. The tunnel wall exploded inward, not from charges from something that had been growing inside the pipe network, feeding on the runoff from the modification laboratories. It had too many mouths, all of them screaming, and limbs that emerged from its mass without apparent skeletal structure. Pack 6 took the brunt of its emergence, losing 3 beasts before anyone could process what was attacking. Gravel didn't hesitate. She launched herself at the thing's center mass, her jaws finding something vital in the chaos of flesh. The pack followed, each beast targeting a different appendage, their coordinated assault turning the creature's size into a liability. The runt proved its worth by severing something that might have been an artery, spraying the tunnel with blood that glowed faintly in the darkness. When the thing finally died or stopped moving, the distinction was academic. Gravel did something that made every handler step back. She began eating it. Not the desperate consumption of a starved beast, but careful, selective bites, as if sampling wine. The other packs watched with the stillness of predators recognizing an apex competitor. "Pull her back," Crest ordered. I tried. The recall whistle produced no response. The command phrases we'd drilled 10,000 times might as well have been wind noise. It took 4 handlers with shock prods borrowed from the guard to get her off the carcass, and even then, she kept trying to return to it, her muscles bunching with barely contained violence. The chaplain was called. He stood in that sewage, his blessed armor somehow remaining clean, and pronounced judgment. The beast shows signs of spiritual contamination. One more incident, and she burns. That night, while the wardens planned the final push into the manufactories, I sat with Gravel in the makeshift kennel we'd established in a burnt-out hab block. She was calm now, the episode passed, but her eyes tracked my movements with an intelligence that had grown sharper since deployment began. When I ran my hands through her fur checking for injuries, I found new growths, small, hard nodules beneath the skin that hadn't been there days before. The apothecary confirmed my suspicion. Gravel was changing, not drift in the traditional sense, but actual biological adaptation. Her body was incorporating elements from the things she killed, her enhanced metabolism processing and integrating foreign genetic material in ways that shouldn't be possible. "It's unprecedented," he said, taking his 14th blood sample. "The gene-smiths will want to study this. Will they let her live long enough to study?" His silence was answer enough. The final assault came at dawn, or what passed for dawn, through the hive's eternal smog cover. Every pack deployed simultaneously, hitting the manufactories from 6 different vectors. The insurgents had turned the industrial complex into a fortress of mutation, each chamber containing new horrors their flesh sculptors had created. We entered through the chemical processing plant, where the air itself was toxic enough to kill unprotected humans in minutes. Our rebreathers could handle an hour, maybe 2. The packs didn't need them. Their enhanced physiologies processed the toxins like nutrients, Gravel especially seeming to thrive in the poisoned atmosphere. The resistance was desperate and absolute. Cultists threw themselves at us in waves, their modifications ranging from subtle to grotesque. Some had replaced their blood with combustible fluid, detonating when killed. Others had been hollowed out and filled with smaller organisms that erupted from corpses to attack again. Each room brought new variations on the theme of human form perverted into weapon. Gravel excelled beyond any measurement of normal pack behavior. She anticipated attack patterns, led the pack through kill zones with minimal losses, identified threats before they manifested. Whatever she was becoming, it was magnificently lethal. The runt followed her with devotion that transcended pack hierarchy, its rebuilt neurons seeming to recognize her as something more than alpha, something approaching divine in the limited theology of a beast's understanding. We reached the primary manufacturing floor to find an assembly line of horror humans fed in at one end, monsters emerging from the other, with every stage of transformation visible between. The insurgent leadership had gathered here for a final stand, their own bodies so modified they barely registered as human to our auspex scans. The engagement lasted 43 minutes. I remember it in fragments, Gravel tearing through a thing that had replaced its skeleton with articulated metal, the runt dragging a wounded handler to safety with teeth gentle enough not to break skin. Render dying when something's acidic blood melted through his skull, the moment when Second Company's Terminators arrived and turned the tide with stormbolters that made our pack warfare look primitive. When it ended, we'd lost 60% of our beasts. Gravel survived, as did the runt and 3 others from Pack 13. The manufactories burned with promethium fire that would take weeks to fully extinguish. The wardens declared the operation a success. But that night, while cataloging the dead and preparing the survivors for extraction, I found Gravel in the corner of our temporary kennel, her body convulsing, not from injury or poison from change. The nodules under her skin had grown, pressing outward, stretching her hide in ways that made my teeth ache to watch. She was growing new organs. The apothecary confirmed it with scans that showed structures developing in real-time redundant hearts. Secondary nervous systems, things that looked like gills beneath her ribs. Her body was trying to evolve past its original design, incorporating every advantage she'd encountered in the things she'd killed. She's becoming something new. The apothecary breathed with the reverence of someone witnessing either miracle or heresy. The gene seed principles applied to a non-human template. She's achieving a form of controlled mutation. The chaplain's response was less enthusiastic. She burns tomorrow. I spent that last night with her, watching her breathe through organs that hadn't existed that morning, feeling the double pulse of hearts beating in syncopation. The runt curled against her, somehow understanding this was ending. When she looked at me, her eyes held recognition that went beyond trained response. She knew what was coming. At dawn, they brought the flames. Gravel didn't fight. She stood while they doused her in blessed promethium, her modified body already beginning to resist the chemicals, adapting even to her own execution. It took 3 attempts to light her, and when she finally burned, she burned wrong, too hot, too bright, colors that shouldn't exist in natural fire. The runt tried to follow her into the flames. I held it back with both arms, its rebuilt neurons firing in patterns of grief that shouldn't have been possible for something bred to be a weapon. We watched until there was nothing left but ash that the tech marines collected in sealed containers marked with warnings in languages I couldn't read. They gave me what remained of Pack 13, the runt and 3 survivors, and orders to rebuild. New breeding stock would arrive within the month. The cycle would begin again. But first, we had to survive extraction from Karos Syndicate, and the cultists hadn't all died in the manufactories. The counterattack came while we were loading the bulk landers. Survivors who'd hidden in the pipe networks, modified with desperation rather than skill, throwing themselves at us with nothing left to lose. The packs responded with trained precision, but they were depleted, exhausted, pushed past their operational limits. The runt saved my life in that last engagement. A cultist with arms replaced by industrial saws came from above, dropping from a ventilation grate I hadn't seen. The runt took him mid-fall, its jaws finding his throat, using momentum to snap his neck before the saws could find my flesh. It landed hard, one leg bending wrong, but kept fighting through the pain. We made it to the landers. The packs were secured in their transit cages, sedated for the journey home. I sat with the runt while the apothecary set its leg, its breathing steady despite the pain, its eyes fixed on the empty cage where gravel should have been. Karos Syndicate fell away beneath us, its atmosphere burning orange where our bombs had started firestorms that would rage for months. Mission successful, acceptable losses, genetic material recovered for study. The Wardens would count it as victory. In the cargo hold, surrounded by depleted packs and exhausted handlers, I updated the ledgers. Pack 13. Combat ineffective pending reconstitution. Gravel, terminated due to unauthorized biological drift. The runt, promoted to full pack member, designated survivor, marked for breeding stock. That was the lesson Keros taught. In the kennels, evolution and extinction were separated by the thinnest margin. Adapt too much, and you become a threat to be burned. Adapt too little, and you become meat for the grinder. The successful handlers learned to guide their beasts through that narrow space, keeping them lethal enough to serve but stable enough to control. 6 months after Keros, the fortress-monastery had settled into its grinding routine. New breeding lines, established from stock shipped from Mars. Survivor the runt who'd earned his name had sired 2 litters that showed promising neural plasticity without his original damage. I'd been promoted to senior handler after Crest died from sepsis when a juvenile's bite went bad. His augmetic arm now decorated the wall of the handler commons, a reminder that experience meant nothing to infected teeth. The Iron Menagerie occupied the fortress's deep levels, below even the regular kennels. Vault 6 Gray through 6 Black contained the things deemed too valuable to destroy but too dangerous for standard deployment. Most handlers never saw inside. Those who did came back with stories edited by memory scrubbing or simple refusal to process what they'd witnessed. The Mechanicus had input there. So did inquisitorial biologist teams who visited on schedules that never appeared in official logs. I was running feed schedules for Pack 19 when the first alarm triggered. Not the sharp bark of combat alert or the low drone of void shields activating. This was a sound I'd never heard before. A harmonic that made my bones ache and sent every beast in the kennels into simultaneous panic. Survivor threw himself against his cage hard enough to bend adamantine. The new pups, barely weaned, tried to burrow through solid rockcrete. My collar's vox crackled with override priority. Vault breach. All available handlers to level 7. Lethal force authorized. Repeat. Lethal force authorized. The last time anyone had authorized lethal force in the monastery itself was 3 centuries ago during a demon incursion. I grabbed what I could shock lance from the wall, bolt pistol that hadn't been fired since qualification, a net thrower that probably wouldn't work, spare power cells, and the portable bolt gun we used for field culling. 4 other handlers responded to the summons. Yorv, 2 juniors whose names I hadn't bothered learning, and Madge who'd been in the kennels since before I was born. The lift to level 7 took 90 seconds that felt like hours. We could hear it through the shaft impacts against metal, something screaming in frequencies that made my fillings ache, the distinctive sound of bolter fire which meant the Astartes were already engaged. The door opened on a scene from a training nightmare played at triple speed. A chain amble the size of a rhino had torn through 3 bulkheads, its restraint frame still partially attached but twisted into a shape that gave it additional reach. Its hide sparked where bolt rounds had failed to penetrate, some genetic modification or unholy blessing making it resistant to blessed ammunition. Behind it, through the holes it had created, more things poured out. Cyber mastiffs with their friend or foe recognition scrambled, their optics blazing red instead of green. Groks with surgical modifications that had given them opposable thumbs. Things I had no name for because they shouldn't have existed outside of an apothecary's fever dream. Handler Brusque was already there with a mixed team, trying to establish a containment line. His spine had never properly healed from his last encounter with an amble, and the augmetic brace that kept him upright whined with every movement. He saw us and pointed toward the breach. Secondary containment at Junction 4. If they reach the main lifts, we lose the entire level. Junction 4 was a natural choke point where 3 corridors merged defensible if we could reach it before the escaped specimens. We ran, boots slipping on fluids I didn't want to identify, while behind us the amble's roar shook dust from pipes that hadn't moved in centuries. The first wave hit us before we made position. Crack wasps, their enhanced metabolism making them faster than their natural counterparts. Their stingers evolved to punch through ceramite. One caught Yorv in the shoulder, the stinger going through his leather and into meat. He screamed, dropped, and started convulsing as venom rewrote his nervous system. I put a bolt through his skull before he could finish transforming into whatever the venom wanted him to become. Madge had brought a flamer from somewhere. Emperor knows the kennels had no official access to guard-grade weapons. She lit up the corridor, turning the air into a tube of fire that crisped the wasps mid-flight. Their bodies hit the deck like burning rain, still twitching, still trying to sting even as they carbonized. We reached Junction 4 just ahead of the main pack. The juniors started setting up the net thrower, while I tried to remember the override codes for emergency bulkheads that might not have been serviced since the heresy. My fingers found the correct sequence through muscle memory from 6 years of munitorum drilling. The bulkhead dropped, buying us seconds. Something hit the door from the other side hard enough to dent it inward. Then again. On the third impact, claws punched through not metal claws, but organic ones that had been modified with ceramite-bonded calcium. They started peeling the door open like it was made of parchment. Positions, Madge barked. We formed a firing line that would have made a guard sergeant weep 5 humans with weapons meant for crowd control trying to hold against things bred to kill space marines. The door came apart. Through the gap came the experiments, the denied breeds, the things that should have been culled but someone had decided to study instead. The first through was almost beautiful in its wrongness. A canine shape stretched to impossible proportions, its spine extended with additional vertebrae, 6 legs instead of 4, a skull that split open to reveal a secondary mouth lined with rotating teeth. It moved like water given murder's purpose, flowing through our net without slowing. I put 3 bolts into what might have been its center mass. It kept coming. Madge's flamer bought us space, but not time. The creatures adapted, some growing heat-resistant scales in real time, others simply accepting the burns as the price of forward momentum. One of the juniors went down under something that had too many joints, his screams cutting off when it found his throat. The other junior tried to run. The things that caught him made sure he couldn't. Fall back to secondary position. But there was no secondary position. Behind us, the main corridor had filled with escaped specimens. We were an island in an ocean of teeth and modified flesh, our ammunition running low, our options narrowing to die fighting or die running. That's when Survivor arrived. I hadn't called him. The breach must have damaged his cage's locks, or perhaps his rebuilt neurons had figured out the mechanism. He was always smarter after his reconstruction. He came through the ventilation system, dropping from above onto the spine-stretched horror that had been advancing on my position. His attack was perfect, textbook, the kind of kill that would have made Gravel proud. Throat, spine, major arteries, all in sequence, all within seconds. Behind him came the rest of Pack 19, my current charges who'd followed their alpha through whatever route he'd found. They fell on the escaped experiments with the fury of beasts defending territory, which in a sense they were the kennels were their world, and these things didn't belong. The fight turned from slaughter to melee. Madge and I stood back to back, picking off targets that got too close while our packs, authorized or not, did what they'd been bred for. Survivor led them with an intelligence that transcended his original design, coordinating attacks, identifying weak points, teaching the younger beasts through example how to fight things that didn't follow normal anatomy. A cybermastiff with scrambled protocols came at me, its mechanical jaws capable of shearing through armor. I raised the shock lance, knowing it wouldn't be enough. Survivor intercepted it mid-leap, his own jaws finding the neural port at the base of its skull. One twist and the mastiff's cybernetics went dead, the organic parts following seconds later. The amble arrived last, having finally torn through whatever defenders had tried to slow it. Up close, I could see the modifications. Someone had been trying to create a living siege engine, replacing its natural armor with manufactured plates, its claws with power field generators, its eyes with targeting augmetics that painted laser dots on whatever it looked at. Madge turned the flamer on it. The promethium washed over its hide without effect. The plates were designed to withstand void exposure. It backhanded her with enough force to fold her in half backwards. She hit the wall and didn't move again, the flamer still firing in her dead grip, painting the ceiling with fire. I had 6 bolts left. The shock lance was broken. The net thrower had jammed 3 targets ago. Behind the amble, more things emerged from the breach. An endless parade of weapons that breathed, experiments that had been deemed too successful to waste. Survivor looked at me. In his rebuilt eyes, I saw calculation, the kind of assessment Gravel used to make measuring distances, evaluating threats, deciding what was worth sacrificing. He'd learned from her, even as she drifted into something unsustainable. But where she'd lost control, he'd found it, his neural reconstruction giving him the ability to think beyond pure instinct. He barked 3 sharp notes that meant nothing in our trained signals but everything to his pack. They formed up around him, a spearhead of gray fur and purpose. Then they charged the amble. The first 3 died on its claws, their bodies buying seconds for the others to find purchase. Survivor went for the gaps between armor plates, his teeth finding flesh that hadn't been replaced with metal. The pack swarmed it, each beast taking a piece, their combined weight finally bringing it down. It crushed 2 more in its death throes, power fields sparking as they failed, augmetics screaming error codes as organic and mechanical systems shut down together. Behind me, I heard Astartes' Boots' second company responding in force, flamers and meltaguns ready to sterilize whatever remained. Brother Sergeant Castor stepped through smoke and burning meat, his helmet surveying the carnage. Handler, report. Containment breach from Vault 6 Gray, multiple specimens escaped. 5 handlers responded, 2 confirmed dead, 1 missing. Pack 19 engaged without authorization. He looked at Survivor, standing over the amble's corpse, blood painting him from muzzle to tail. A space marine evaluating a weapon's performance. Your pack held the junction. Yes, Lord. They prevented breach of the primary levels. Yes, Lord. He raised his bolter. For a moment, I thought he would execute them all for acting without orders. Instead, he turned and put 3 rounds into something still twitching in the corner. Secure your pack. Report to the chaplain for purity verification. The Mechanicus will want samples from the amble. Second company pushed past us, moving to secure the vaults. We could hear them engaging deeper in, the distinctive sound of melta charges, collapsing sections that couldn't be recovered. Whatever else had been in those vaults would burn rather than risk further contamination. I led Pack 19 back through corridors that looked like an anatomy lesson turned inside out. Survivor walked beside me, no leash needed, his pack following in perfect formation despite their injuries. We'd lost 4 acceptable by kennel standards, miraculous given what we'd faced. The chaplain waited in the primary kennel, his crozius still glowing from whatever rites he'd performed to seal the breach. He examined each beast, looking for signs of corruption, mutation, spiritual contamination. Survivor stood perfectly still as ceramite fingers probed his skull, checked his teeth, evaluated his eyes for any sign of drift. "This one has been modified," the chaplain said. "Neural reconstruction after phosphex exposure, Lord Chaplain. Documented and approved by the apothecarium. And it maintained pack discipline during the breach? It led the containment, Lord Chaplain." He stood silent for 23 seconds. I counted them in heartbeats my collar faithfully recorded. Finally, he placed one massive finger on Survivor's head, a gesture that in any other context might have been blessing. "It may continue, but watch for drift. The modified ones always drift, given time." Survivor would prove him wrong over the next 3 years, maintaining perfect discipline through 14 deployments, siring 6 litters that showed enhanced intelligence without instability. But that night, we didn't know what would come. We only knew we'd survived something that shouldn't have been survivable. The cleanup took weeks, bodies rendered down for safe disposal. Sections of Level 7 sealed permanently. The Iron Menagerie relocated to a facility off-world where containment breaches wouldn't threaten the fortress-monastery. They never found all the escaped specimens, sometimes. Even now, handlers report seeing things in the deep vents that shouldn't exist, shadows with too many legs, sounds that suggest something is still breeding in the dark. I was promoted again to Kennel Master, responsible for all packs and their handlers. The position came with better quarters, higher-grade augmetics to replace parts that had been damaged beyond healing, and access to records that showed how often the kennels had nearly failed, how many times a single handler's decision had prevented catastrophe. Survivor lived another 7 years before age finally claimed him. Not drift, not combat, just the inevitable failure of organs that had been pushed too hard for too long. I was there when he died, his rebuilt neurons finally going quiet, his eyes losing focus for the last time. We rendered him according to protocol, his genetics preserved for future breeding, his meat feeding the next generation. But I kept one thing a single tooth, the one he'd broken during the breach, taking down something that shouldn't have existed. It sits on my desk now, a reminder of the night a damaged runt became something more, the night the kennels nearly died, the night we learned that sometimes the broken things are the ones that save you. New handlers come to me now, fresh from the munitorum or the armory or wherever the chapter finds bodies willing to work with monsters. I tell them the same thing Cress told me, the same thing his predecessor probably told him: everything here bites. You survive by biting back. But I also tell them something else, something I learned from Gravel's Drift and Survivor's Rise. The beasts aren't just weapons. They're weapons that dream, that adapt, that sometimes understand more than we want them to. Our job isn't just to aim them at the enemy. It's to guide that understanding, to be the conscience they weren't bred to have, to know when mercy is strength and when strength is mercy. Most handlers don't last long enough to learn that lesson. The ones who do become like their beasts, scarred, efficient, living in the space between human and weapon. We maintain the ledgers that never run out of lines. We make the cuts that have to be made. We stand in corridors while the librarian counts down to atmospheric purge, holding lines that shouldn't be holdable. This is the horrifying life we chose, or that chose us. Every scar earned in service, every nightmare logged and filed, every beast that dies under our hands, a reminder that in the grim darkness of the far future, even the monsters need keepers. And sometimes, in the deep nights when the kennels are quiet except for sleeping breaths and rattling chains, I think about Gravel burning with colors that shouldn't exist, about Survivor dropping from the vents like salvation with teeth, about all the beasts I've sent to die for an empire that sees them as expendable as bolter shells. The collar around my throat still records everything: pulse, stress hormones, fear markers, signs of what they call excessive sympathy. But after all these years, I've learned to keep my vitals steady even when I remember their names, even when I honor their service in ways the chapter would never approve. Because that's the final lesson. In the kennels, everyone is meat waiting to be processed. The beasts, the handlers, even the Astartes who command us. The only difference is some of us know it, and we keep working anyway, maintaining the machine that turns living things into weapons, hoping that when our time comes, someone will remember we were more than just another line in a ledger. Tomorrow, new breeding stock arrives from Mars. 10 more lineage numbers to fill. 10 more beasts to raise and train, and eventually watch die. The cycle continues, as it always has, as it always will, until the last kennel falls silent and the last handler closes the final ledger. But tonight, I sit with survivors' descendants, watching them play fight in patterns he taught them, their rebuilt neurons firing in sequences he pioneered. They don't know their ancestors saved the fortress-monastery. They don't know they carry genetic markers of a runt who shouldn't have survived his first deployment. They only know that when I enter their bay, I bring food and purpose, and sometimes, when no one is watching, I thumb their scars twice a gesture. Gravel taught me, a sign of recognition between predators who've chosen not to kill each other today. That choice, renewed shift by shift, is what makes us human in a place designed to strip humanity away. It's what separates us from the beasts, even as we become more like them with every passing year. It's the thin line between handler and handled, between keeper and kept, between the one holding the leash and the one wearing the collar. In the kennels of the Sable Wardens, we all wear collars. Some are just more visible than others.